let's talk about writing for luxury brands. So at my agency, Hire a Writer, we did this huge research project, top 500 brands in the world, and we audited all of the brand voices. We basically extracted like all the linguistic factors and then created these archetypes to help writers better understand and accelerate their progress to be able to quickly write for specific kinds of brands that appeal to specific audiences. So this has everything to do with the vibe. It has everything to do with speaking in the language of people who make purchases from these certain kinds of brands. And today I want to walk you through how to write for luxury brands, which is an archetype that we have as, let's see if I can get the thing to work. Yep. Which is an archetype that we have called, drumroll please, Joe. So we use visualizations for these archetypes, mainly because a picture is worth 1,000 words. And it can be very helpful as a writer to have some kind of idea of who you're writing as. So it's the idea of kind of putting yourself in the shoes of this individual and considering how they might convey brand promises, brand messages, and ideas to an ideal audience. Often you'll find a brand seeks to mirror their audience, seeks to kind of relate to them on some level. And so using a visual representation is a really powerful way to kind of help writers like cozy into that mentality. So let's talk a little bit about Joe. Some of the brands that we audited that we would say are represented by this archetype are Nescafe, The Atlantic, Ghirardelli, Bloomberg, Heineken, a lot of high-end, a lot of luxury, which is obviously in the name, but not just that. So there are also brands that, like, for instance, Barnes & Noble or Seattle's Best, that aren't really luxury brands per se, but they do position with some exclusivity. Okay, so that's definitely like when you write for a brand like this, you want to think about who's in the club, right? Who's in the VIP lounge. You're using a lot of unique language. So for instance, if you ran most of the main core copy for these brands through a tool like Grammarly or Hemingway or something, they almost always write at a significantly elevated grade level. So we're talking refined vocabulary, expansive vocabulary, definitely an intellectual slant to the way that they self-present in the marketplace, and that kind of exclusive vibe that you have to be a certain caliber of individual in order to be associated with this brand. Some of the words that we would use to describe this archetype is self-assured, convincing, witty, and academic. So if you kind of gut check anything that you would write for a luxury brand where you're seeking to convey the idea that this is special, this is precious, this is something to be enjoyed and luxuriated in, you want to kind of gauge it against these descriptors and consider, is this serious-minded? Is this confident? Does it feel compelling and convincing? There's a richness to the language that you use when you work for a brand like this. Out of every brand type that we audited, this one is the least gendered. By which I mean, so for instance, natural brands, if you watched my video on that for Anne, the archetype for natural brands, it is very gendered. It's very feminine. Not to say it's female, but it's very feminine. Some of the language used, and even just in the linguistics themselves, and then if you translate and things like that. This one is not. There is a very fine line that you walk with this archetype that really spans kind of feminine and masculine, which is fun to play with. We like to tie these archetypes into a literary reference as a way of just helping you further your understanding of how you want to come across when you write as this brand. And so the literary reference that we have for this one is Jo March from Little Women, which is a Louisa May Alcott novel. And Jo's quote is, "I want to do something splendid before I go into my castle. Something heroic or wonderful that won't be forgotten after I'm dead. I don't know what, but I'm on the watch for it, and I mean to astonish you all someday. I think I shall write books and get rich and famous. That would suit me. So that is my favorite dream." It is very tempting when you write for a luxury brand to talk too much about status, wealth, means, these kind of things. People who are either aspiring to be buyers in this cohort or who are already there often don't want to call attention to that. they want to think in terms of success and accomplishment. So this is very important as you're driving any kind of audience segmentation discussion with a brand like this, because there's a quick leap to, well, you're a person of means, and so you can afford to buy this handbag. And even if that's the internal discussion, you're missing the mark. That's not the point, right? Money is never the point. It's about what they've accomplished. It's about their stature. It's about them as an individual. People in this group are hyper individualistic. They are not communal. They are not groupthink. They want to feel truly unique and special. That's the whole point, right? It's what unique means. It's what VIP means, right? It's either a very small group or, even better, it's just me. So appealing to that pride in a thoughtful and careful and non-patronizing way is a really important element of being a really good copywriter for luxury brands. All right, let me find that. Other imagery, you'll notice lots of monotone, lots of geometric shapes. It's very sharp, it's very sumptuous, it's very multi-textured. There's a level of incredible precision, usually, about the way these brands represent graphically. And then let's make some cultural leaps. So if we were to give cultural references for Joe, people who come off like this archetype, we would talk about Rashida Jones. She's probably the most accessible out of this group in that she's very girl next door, but there's also a level of sophistication to her heritage. There's an incredible level of accomplishment for her work, all of that. Natalie Portman, the statuesque, right? The regal carriage, all of that is very aligned with this archetype. Stephen Fry, so he's another example that's like Rashida Jones, where he's got this, I mean, he's a comedian, he's very funny, but he's also very composed, and there's a level of kind of dignity, but a wit about it. So it's a very important counterbalance, especially if you don't come from money and that is not your circle at all. You have to be really, really careful to play this right, because it's an exclusive club and they want to be spoken to like equals. And so there's a fine line to draw where you can become over serious. And I find that's the default, right? To become too serious when you're writing for brands like this, which is why I've thrown these kind of examples in as a way to help you like counterbalance that instinct. And then Michelle Obama, because she's the height of class and poise, and I will fight anyone who says otherwise. All right, more imagery. We're talking people who are willing to make incredible investments in their own life, who are willing to curate their environment in an incredibly meticulous way, who are passionate about the arts and culture. So you think at this level, buyers are very philanthropic. They're very interested in their kind of associations and their community. All of that becomes a very important element as you consider how to convey the right ideas. And then as somebody interacts with a brand like this, here's what you want them to feel like. Joe feels like taking an elective with the most popular professor on campus. So people choose to associate with this elective, right? There's a level of popularity that's powerful and winning and attractive, but it's also quite exclusive in that there's a limited number of seats in that class. So if you win one, you've really won, right? You really won a space in that. So I think that, and there's a narrow group of people, so the campus mentality. So there's quite a lot kind of packed into what we think that feels like that you can think through as you're crafting narratives for this. Again, exclusive, high-end, these are people in echoey marble halls. These are people in the finest rooms, finest dining, taking in art, enjoying all the finest things that life has to offer. So let's reference some of the language that's used for brands like these. So for instance, Nescafe, we catch coffee at its brightest. So there's an exclusive element to that. There's an aspirational. Bloomberg, we connect the world's decision makers to accurate information. So decision makers, if you subscribe to Bloomberg, you are a decision maker. People want to be associated with that and in that crowd with that title. The Atlantic will honestly endeavor to be the exponent of the American idea. Heineken, open your world. Ghirardelli, moments of timeless pleasure. We did find an overlap with the luxury brand and the legacy brand, but there is a unique, so there is sometimes some timing, legacy, eternal, endless. Like there's time language with these brands, but it's mostly about sensory. So there's like a lot of sensuality in the way that brands like this will represent themselves, which while it's set against a word that has something to do with time, is really about right now. It's really about the experience right here, right now. So there can be an immediacy, but there is not urgency, because people like this do not have to be urgent, right? They have the luxury of taking their time. So it's a balance. And then LV, the truth, which is quite a moral standard, but one nevertheless that people like to be associated with. So there are lots of ways to use all the little ideas I just sprinkled to create a practice around writing for luxury brands. It is not as easy as it looks. These are also often not the brands that are going to have white papers, that are going to have huge SEO strategies, because these are not volume plays for the most part. Some of them were, right? You can look back at the brand examples. Some of them were, but not all of them. And so it's important to consider scarcity drives demand. It makes something seem more appealing. It's a limited release. It only happens once a year. It's the rare orchid blooming in the hothouse. So I think that as you consider what you could produce for a brand like this, it's absolutely worth taking your time. It's about getting every single word right. It's about crafting the story so that it feels like you're taking the reader on a journey. It's about making sure they feel invited in to a very exclusive and precious place. And all of that is achieved by a writer, right? With the graphic design department. But a great writer can really capture that, the emotion of that and the feeling of that, and invite somebody in to be a part of it. So I absolutely recommend to you, if you want to learn how to write for luxury brands better, read a lot and order print magazines. This is one of the few places where product information and actual like fashion magazines and lifestyle magazines for this level of people in society can be really, really important, because you begin to hear insider language. And that will be really, really helpful input for you as you craft a practice in this space. Subscribe to my channel. You are more than welcome to. I have a LinkedIn newsletter you can subscribe to. We've got a blog subscription where we never send you sales stuff, just more ideas on copywriting and how to enhance your own practices.